Hey there, I'm Mark, in affiliation with Spectrum Pulse, and we got rap beef to get through this week, and it's Billboard BREAKDOwn. I don't remember. So I said last week that the extended time between events and the Hot 100 getting released can be a boon when it comes to more comprehensive analysis. But there's another side to it, the feeling that I'm just late to the party, that everyone has already seen as many reactions and critique and analysis as they can stomach, and thus you wind up feeling like you're beating on a dead horse, or you don't have anything new to offer. Of course, when one of the songs to come out of that moment turns into something close to a cultural phenomenon, and you're still reckoning with the implications of all that, yeah, you know what? Let's not waste time. Our new top 10, and a new number 1 that cleared the competition by a mile, Not Like Us by Kendrick Lamar. Let's make this clear. I'll have a lot more to say about this song later on, and some of it y'all won't like, but it became rapidly clear that with the sales, the streaming, and the YouTube, it was running up before there's even an official video, and there will be one. It was bulldozing any competition in its way, and given that it's now been shipped to radio, it's only a matter of time before it really locks up that top spot. God only knows when that happens, especially with that Morgan Wallen Post Malone collab that's coming, but it was enough to clear over $1 Million Baby by Tommy Richmond at number 2, which just could not keep pace across the board. And that's kind of wild, because for a bit it was a two-horse race between that song and Euphoria by Kendrick Lamar at number 3, which leapt into the top 10 with a bit less on sales, but trailing right behind on streaming. But you know what? Not Like Us just crushed them both. Go figure. Now this leaves Fortnite by Taylor Swift featuring Post Malone almost feeling like an afterthought at number 4. Yeah, it's picked up a lot of radio pretty quick, but it doesn't have a ton of forward momentum, and the streaming fell off rather sharply. The more I think about it, the more this feels like it's a good song, but not exactly a strong single. It'll be telling to see what actually gets pushed next. And yet, it was enough to hold over a bar song Tipsy by Shabuzi at number 5, where it's winning on sales, it just cannot compete at the same volume on streaming, and radio is way too sluggish to get on board yet. Although, it really feels like they should. If pushed properly, this could do a lot for radio over the summer. Then we have Like That by Future, Metro Boomin, and Kendrick Lamar up to number 6. I said last week that it would be telling if this song picked up traction amidst all the other diss tracks, and it speaks to both industry and cultural penetration that the streaming saw gains and radio is still on the upswing. One of the areas this beef was won was on culture. That cannot be ignored. And if you need any more proof, it beat out our other new debut in the top 10, Family Matters by Drake at number 7. I mean, it got a ton of streams, it sold decently well, just not enough. Now this leaves 3 songs with tangible radio traction stranded outside, and it's hard for me to complain about any of it. At number 8, Espresso by Sabrina Carpenter, where she actually saw streaming losses amidst the radio momentum. At number 9, Beautiful Things by Benson Boone, which hit a radio peak and it's losing streams as well. And Lose Control by Teddy Swims at number 10, which is doing a credible job holding that top radio spot, and that's the majority of what it has. Oh well. Now this naturally takes us to our losers and our dropouts, of which the only one of notice in the latter category is La Diabla by Javi, actually having clinched the year-end list spot for 2024. I mean, of his 2 songs that broke through this year, it is the better one. I'm not gonna complain. Now as for our losers, well, Texas Hold'em is losing momentum at 36, having already clinched its year-end list spot, and Adavino by Mike Towers and Bad Bunny slid off the debut to 91, but as expected, the rest is Taylor Swift with the next wave of her album bomb losses. So, from the top, Who's Afraid of Little Old Me at 26, So Long London at 28, But Daddy I Love Him at 30, My Boy Only Breaks His Favorite Toys at 31, Florida featuring Florence and the Machine at 33, Guilty as Sin at 35, The Tortured Poets Department at 38, The Smallest Man Who Ever Lived at 51, Love of My Life at 53, Fresh Out the Slammer at 54, The Alchemy at 56, I'm Gonna Get You Back at 62, I Can Fix Him, No Really I Can at 63, So High School School at 65, The Black Dog at 67, Clarabow at 70, The Prophecy at 77, How Did It End at 81, Thank You Amy at 88, The Albatross at 89, I Hate It Here at 94, and Chloe or Sam or Sophia or Marcus at 100. You know, for as many people who online seem to be openly despising this album, it's having more chart longevity than I think, well, any of them could have expected. Even with as huge as Taylor Swift is, this many songs lasting post-album bomb, it's kind of insane, especially given the competition. Now, what it means is that we got a very limited number of returns and gains, the most jarring in the former group being Cowgirls by Morgan Wallen and Ernest at 42. Because guess what just got shipped to Nashville radio? Fan-fucking-tastic. Now, the slightly better story comes with the return of Training Season by Dua Lipa to 79, thanks to her album impact. Unfortunately, flipping over to the gains, though, it saw Illusion jump to 50, and I'm starting to be convinced that's her worst song to date. Now, the rest of our gains are a mixed bag. Off the continued gains, Get It Sexy by Sexy Red is up to 21. Off the returns, Dirt Cheap by Cody Johnson went to 83. We Ride by Brian Martin went to 82. And Bandit by Don Toliver went to 72. And the last two here have some elasticity to fluctuate, but stick roughly to position. Tucson Too Late by Jordan Davis at 71. And Get In With Me by Boss Mandilo at 61. The follow-up from last week, given that UMG and TikTok did strike their deal, I'll be focusing a lot less on that industry machination, but it's worth noting as a whole subsection of the music industry gets to push from TikTok again. I mean, it might be fortuitous timing to factor into the beef, given how both Kendrick and Drake have deals, distribution or otherwise, that roll up under UMG. But you know what? We're not quite there yet. We got a couple other new arrivals before we get into that mess proper. Number 99, Take Her Home by Kenny Chesney.
Good Lord up above, that he said one down into your arms and put a chain around your raised hell heart.
Here's something you might not know. Kenny Chesney has not released a new album since 2020's Here and Now. And while it'd be very funny to highlight that the title track was so tone-deaf at the time of its release during lockdown that it stalled out his entire career, no, it's not quite true. He had two other minor hits following it. He had a great collab song with Kelsey Ballerini in 2021, a couple other songs that didn't really go anywhere in 2022, and now he's back with this single, which dropped November of last year and is only hitting the Hot 100 now. And, you know what, I'm honestly struck by how blandly incompetent it is. Not that it's outright bad, but it feels so underwhelming and questionably assembled. I mean, Kenny Chesney sounds checked out. The trap skitter and drum machine, it's there behind some of the broader guitars, but mostly buried. You could probably thank the Hardy co-write for that one. And the story about a young love hookup and later having kids, it feels blunted by a lot of wonky lyrical choices. The Touch Tunes reference to deep cut, cheap Trick, it almost feels like a brand placement until we get the Patron line. I'm more bewildered by how it first implies his girl is singing along with that music, but the following lines in the first verse has him go to someone who doesn't have a boyfriend, so is he just openly cheating, or is the time mixed up? Then there's just turns of phrase that feel awkward, like stuffed truck and raised hell heart, and then describing a baby like a 7-pound 5-ounce scene in a car seat creeping down the interstate. I mean, how is this not proofread? This is a mess. Except then you realize the song is otherwise dull as dishwater, and I guarantee that I will have forgotten this in record time. Next, number 95, WhatsApp Wassam by Gunna.
Shit change, but it still get pushed back. I drop me these little nigga push back. I count up, just look at my contract.
I didn't have many kind things to say about Gunna's newest bloated project, where the album bomb is probably coming next week, Joy, but this is probably my favorite song from the album, with the production doing the majority of the heavy lifting, with that flute cascading around the grander arrangement as the bass wells up around the sharper trap percussion. The groove from Turbo and Evergreen is terrific. Let's get a remix with a much more interesting rapper than Gunna. And you know what, his monotone is probably the worst part of the song, but he doesn't have as many bad lines as I expected. I mean, I personally did not know you could do wire transfers through WhatsApp, and I find it distinctly hilarious that Gunna wants to spank one of his haters, and the line, allergic to broke, I got allergies, yeah, it's pretty dumb. But the rest of the shallow brand name flexing as he tries to revitalize his career, so much so that a girl wants to inherit him, okay. I mean, it's flimsy, but it's Gunna, so passable, maybe? Again, how much anyone actually cares about what Gunna says, it's up to debate. The production really is the star of the show here. In other words, I think it's good, but again, that album bomb possibly coming, it's not gonna be fun to handle. Number 86, Si No Quieres No by Luis R. Conriquez and Neton Vega.
El pelo largo y con un reloj de diamantes finos, si no quieres no.
I've previously avoided calling the regional Mexican explosion of the past couple of years a trend. I was very tempted to, it seemed too idiosyncratic to last that long for the mainstream, but what I expect will happen is similar to other scenes crossing over, especially in non-English languages, that the biggest names become sustainable hitmakers, the rest see sporadic crossover. Now with that, here are two acts I've never talked about before. Luis R. Conriquez is having been quite active in the corrido scene with 4 albums already, and Neton Vega, okay, less so. His biggest credit is co-writing Rubicon with Peso Pluma. And, well, Conriquez is more guttural and visceral with a lot of reverb stacked up around his voice to make him sound more imposing. Vega is a cleaner balladeer, honestly doesn't really match the darker energy of the song, where we get some actual bass to match with the painfully brittle acoustics and the staccato horns. Even if I think the guitar work is a fair bit more complex than I expected, especially on the outro. Now the lyrics, when translated, it's cartel-level gangsta operations with some very dark implications, and while the activities currently swirling around the Mexican elections had me give this a lot of pause. I mean, Conriquez is literally signed to a label, Cartel Music. I can be realistic. I can take this as more posturing than anything else. Honestly, this sound still really isn't for me, but in this lane, I did like this song more than I thought I would, so I guess it's worth a shot. Unlike number 37, Miles on It by Marshmello and Kane Brown.
The engine running, just you and me in a truck bed wide like a California king. We could break it in if you know what I mean.
Okay, the infuriating thing with Kane Brown isn't that he's not talented, but he seems to make a lot of rash or stupid decisions. He's cut good songs I like, but he's nowhere near consistent, and then he'll decide to do something asinine like work with Marshmello, years after people stopped caring about him. Now, I will say this, it's better than One Thing Right, not hard, but the slushy synthesizer ran behind the acoustic guitars, the synthetic multi-tracking, and the weirdly weak percussion, all forced through way too much compression, it leads to a song that's got no tangible impact for me. And for otherwise shallow EDM about breaking in a new truck with your girl, in more ways than one, that second verse gets rather explicit, gross. I mean, you need some impact, but the bigger problem here might be Kane Brown. He's trying to come across as laid back and cool, and I'm sorry, it's just not working when there's no subtlety to speak of. It just sounds so checked out and hollow. And yeah, the tempo is fast enough I can see myself tolerating this in the right environment. I know myself. But that's not exactly an indictment of quality so much as an indictment of me, especially when you hear this has been shipped to Nashville radio, proving that once again, Music Row has no standards for what they consider country beyond who is making it, and if that person got their proper cosign and the right check cleared. This is not getting my cosign, skip it. Number 12, Meet the Grahams by Kendrick Lamar.
Dear Adonis, I'm sorry that man is your father, let me be honest. It takes a man to be a man, your dad is not responsive. I look at him and wish your grandpa would have wore a condom.
And now on to the tough, meaty part of this episode, and as I said with Euphoria last week, there needs to be some care in discussing rap beef with the acknowledgement that this has already hit the streets, and even if things are settling down for a bit, the sort of allegations that Kendrick Lamar made public on this song are not to be handled lightly. What I appreciate is that, at least here, he knows that. He recognizes it. And thus we see one of the most bleak and horrifying diss tracks that might have ever been released, with the Alchemist handling of production with the eerie keys and lumbering groove and gospel howls echoing through the distance. It's been described as the soundtrack of a horror movie, but I think it should be clarified that it's a sort of stalking, psychological nightmare fuel that ends with the phrase, "He then turned the gun on himself." I mean, 4 verses. The first to Drake's son Adonis, the second to his parents, the third to a previously unknown daughter. The fourth to Drake himself, where it feels like ripping away any veneer around Drake to see the wretched man beneath it. The true picture of the guy who is consumed by his vices. And while we could go beat by beat through everything in order to shock the audience, the truly disquieting part is that if you follow Drake in depth, especially in Toronto, none of it is that surprising. I mean, the drug abuse, the solicitation, the gambling, that's known. It would contribute to Kendrick highlighting how bad with money Drake is and the sketchy ways he's been moving in response and why he's dropping so many projects. And for the underage allegations, look, folks knew about the embassy parties for years, to say nothing of Baca's case, and Drake himself used Tupac's vocals on Tailor Made to goad Kendrick into mentioning it. Perhaps the worst possible attempt to play with the 8 Mile tactic, because with so many allegations swirling around for years, it winds up feeling more true, and the latter denials on the Heart Part 6 did not save him. And for the record, for those who expected Kendrick Lamar to go to the police about any of this, to paraphrase Lil Bill, who did an excellent video on this specifically, when you have Drake then bragging about his relationships with the compromised Toronto PD and Toronto politicians, to say nothing of the mob ties of which I will not elaborate, do you honestly think they were gonna stop him? Then comes the daughter allegation. And the frustrating thing here is I found news articles tied to a Miami bartender from back in 2015 with a possible paternity test where the dates line up. I mean, it's independent of Drake obviously lying and said he fed Kendrick the information. If Drake really had found the mole in OVO and was using him to feed Kendrick bad data, he wouldn't have made so many grievous tactical missteps in this beef. But look, for me, the tea was never going to be the deciding factor, with the best part of that third verse being the sheer venom in which Kendrick delivers the final line about more life. Good God. But the masterclass is the final verse, where Kendrick admits it did not have to go personal. It could have just been verbal sparring, but Drake went there. He made the same stupid mistake he made with Pusha T, and where any remaining shred of cultural cachet burns away as Kendrick Lamar stacks up his vocals to feel like a gospel choir and highlights everything Drake has lied about, fueling his insecurity and make art that nobody has truly believed in. To the final line, Drake's biggest enemy, his biggest battle, it's himself. And when you couple it with near perfect timing to stifle any conversation about family matters, look, I get why it charted lower. It's honestly a difficult song to revisit for how ugly it is. I'm kind of stunned it charted at all, but it worked with a heinous efficiency, where the echo of Pusha T's line, "If we all go to hell, it'll be worth it," as the implication that Push would have taken it there too if Drake had fired back. To me, this would have finished the job. But before we get to what did, we have to then talk about what could have worked. Number 7, Family Matters by Drake.
50 bag for the mob in a spot. Drop a 50 bag, 29 for the thought. I was really trying to keep it PG. I was really trying to keep it PG.
Let me make this abundantly clear as someone who is no fan of Drake, and even less so given how he's behaved in recent years. The potential is here for this to have worked. I'm of the opinion that Drake is a rapper who at his best can compete with Kendrick, which is why for chunks of this beef, I've had this as closer than many do. And let me make this clear, there are real shots that Drake takes here that land even before we get to the allegations. For example, Drake could have pushed deeper on the activist angle when it comes to Kendrick Lamar's rap, just how he's as much of an entertainment for the masses as Drake is. No Name threw those shots at Kendrick, and there's validity there, as are the shots to Kendrick Lamar's integrity. He might have been savvy breaking his ego across several albums, preempting a lot of it, but if Drake really wanted to twist the knife, he could go in deeper, drill into questions of respectability, playing to white audiences at TDE and Interscope's behest, and winning Grammys and a Pulitzer, especially targeting the messy hypocrisies that deeper thinkers have observed around Kendrick Lamar. It would have gotten political, probably more than Drake has ever been, but I have been saying for weeks, those are lines of attack on Kendrick, and Drake actually started down that path, but he clearly thought his nuke was implying that Kendrick kids were really those of his business partner Dave Free, and that Kendrick Lamar laid hands on Whitney, his wife, because that blows apart Kendrick Lamar's integrity defense, and he's got a much higher pedestal from which to fall. And honestly, There's a chance that that last case is true. There's a lot of murky hearsay I found in my research. It's about as credible as Drake having a daughter in terms of the mid-2010s sources that I have found, and Drake also knows it just has to be plausible to work. If Kendrick Lamar does not address it at some form on record, it's gonna look away to me, especially given how honest he has been on his albums and has conveniently stepped around this. We Cry Together looks different in a certain regard, but truth be told, how women have been framed in these rap battles has been gross from both angles. But again, the allegations were never going to be what decided any beef for me. And that is the first mistake that Drake took from losing to the story of Adidon. It was never just, you are hiding a child. It was a larger dissection and critique of Drake's character as a man. But if you're convinced you gotta win the tabloid internet, I understand Drake going there, I get the tactic. Would that have been his only mistake? Because instead of just focusing on Kendrick, over a third of the song is targeting everyone else Drake has issues with passing shots at Metro Boomin, Rick Ross, A$AP Rocky. I mean, you could have just ignored him, Drake. It only makes you look still not over Rihanna with this. But the most at The Weeknd. Now, from one angle, that kind of makes sense. He's the closest to home. Their beef goes back years. And The Weeknd is not a rapper and should be dismissed quickly. But it speaks to another big mistake in my books beyond the tacky lines about The Weeknd's music playing more in gay clubs tied to some Cash XO allegations. If you have street shit in your own city that you have not squashed for years and shootings are already going down, you leave yourself open at a critical angle. Drake, you should have wrapped this up after war years ago. And that's the infuriating thing about Family Matters. As a whole, it's not focused on who your main target is when you should have ignored everyone else. If they don't matter, leave them away. It's leaning too hard on salacious details that Drake feels he has to explain multiple times. And while I like the beat switches from the ominous trap to the oily drill to the creeping strings in the final section, the song is aiming for this cinematic grandeur, including that video, and I think it's revealing of arrogance and laziness to not come as prepared and correct for Kendrick, assuming that this would be enough. Or hell, at least not leave as so many obvious angles to yourself in referencing West Coast MCs and gangsters who would prove they back Kendrick when Toronto doesn't really back you, or holding Pharrell's jewelry, which gives Kendrick the layup of an attack, or how The Weeknd would travel to Atlanta, which Kendrick would directly flip as well on you, or the clumsy as hell attempt to tack on Michael Jackson's uglier side to Kendrick, and it doesn't stick because you've owned that branding so much. So while I can agree that this is some of Drake's strongest rapping in a while, he lands body blows. In hindsight, it's more revealing than good. And on that note, it takes us to number 1, Not Like Us by Kendrick Lamar.
Man down, call her Amber Lambs, tell him breathe, bro. Nail a nigga to the cross, he walk around like Tizo. What's up with these jabroni ass niggas trying to see Compton? The industry can hate me, fuck them all and they mama. How many options you really got? I mean, it's too many options. I'm finna pass on this body, I'm John Stockton.
So there's a big difference between acknowledging when something works versus whether you like it or not. And Not Like Us by Kendrick Lamar might as well be the poster child of that, because while it absolutely won the beef in Kendrick's favor, I really don't care for this song that much. And for me to say that despite everything that Kendrick lands, it's relevant. Let's focus on the good first. I like the wit and the sense of humor once again. And even if the joke's in questionable taste, they're proving to ring off, where you find new quotables every given day. Beat your ass and hide the Bible of God watching, that A minor line, the bird references, Kendrick's exasperation at Drake assuming that the audience isn't smart, flipping back how Drake is as much of a pop star hiding behind IG captions, and then leaning on some very direct Compton cultural references alongside the weird mess that is OVO. It's a stark juxtaposition. And the third verse is fucking great, running down the history of Atlanta to directly tie what Drake has appropriated from the city and the culture, where Kendrick could not only trigger the anger from Toronto natives that God's Plan wasn't filmed up here, but also reference the jewelry from Pharrell and make that colonizer line actually land. And while I don't love this style of production from DJ Mustard, I prefer his more groove-driven beats, whereas the bass rumble, brittle hi-hats, and the snap against the creaking strings and wheezy sample, it's good, just not fully my thing from him. The simplified format and structure is proof that Kendrick Lamar could have easily made West Coast club bangers for years. It could have rolled Drake off the charts, but he chose to do more. I mean, it has me looking at this track like a victory lap, where Drake trying to get defensive badly on the Hard Part 6, it barely even registers. But look, there is a weird taste to this celebration I just cannot shake, and I think some of it is Kendrick's performance coming across a little inert or kind of flat to me compared to the dramatic intensity that he has shown at his best in this beef. Then there's the pedo angle that Kendrick really wants to stick with so many lines, and the John Stockton line was clever, but when you compare it to the gravity presented with Meet the Grams with these allegations, which I thought would have been enough to end the beef, it comes across as weirdly slight to dumb it down for a dance bop, where I'm reminded that one of Kendrick Lamar's other big influences is Eminem, and this was a dark joke even M couldn't land. But in a way, that also makes a certain degree of sense, because Eminem always made a point to show respect to hip-hop culture, and this fitting within that canon, it works, despite itself. But you know what, I just can't shake the ugly feeling that this is a few bullets or court cases away from aging really badly, like a lot of those old Eminem staples have. And that's gonna be the underlying reality going to this place in rap beef, where for the public at large, it's just entertainment. I know Kendrick knows that. I also know that he's not above going to this place. Hell, he wouldn't have if Drake hadn't opened Pandora's box. But this being the most credible final word, it feels like a choice. And it's the least favorite of the disses that Kendrick dropped. Frankly, I really wish he could have gotten that Al Green sample clear for 616 in LA. That song was fantastic. Like it a lot more than this. But that's a lot, and that's our week. Best and worst are pretty straightforward. Best is Meet the Grams by Kendrick Lamar, even if it's likely to be a song that I rarely revisit. Worst is Miles on It by Marshmello and Kane Brown. Shocker. Next week, well, that Post Malone Morgan Wallen collab, it's gonna be a thing. We're gonna see if Gunna gets the album bomb. But until then, I'm Mark. You're watching Billboard Breakdown, affiliated with Spectrum Pulse. And I'll see you